The sitting is open. I declare the third part session of the 2023 Ordinary Session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe open. Can I remind all members that they should be sitting in their designated seat? For the first time ever, we are seated in political groups, so if there are any questions, there is a place for you to sit. Nobody will be left behind. And let's see at the end of this week how this system is functioning. Madam Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, Madam Secretary General of the Parliamentary Assembly, ambassadors, members of the Assembly, all those who are following our meeting online or from the public gallery, I wish to welcome you all to this third part session of our Assembly. There is good news, there is bad news. Let me start with the bad news. While we are meeting here in peaceful Strasbourg, Ukrainian soldiers are engaging Russian invasion forces in an attempt to restore national sovereignty and territorial integrity in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia's political and military leadership continue their terrorist attacks on Ukrainian cities, villages and vital infrastructure, and still refuse to end their illegal criminal invasion of its neighboring country. Since the beginning of Russia's war of aggression, millions of Ukrainian citizens, mostly women and children, have had to leave their homes and even their country, seeking shelter in one of our other member states. Some of those who could not flee in time became victims of war's oldest, most silenced, and least condemned crime, sexual violence. Today, on the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, we mourn the victims of sexual violence in Ukraine as we mourn all other victims in this brutal, illegal war that should never have started and must end as soon as possible. To show our sympathy for all the victims and to show our unwavering solidarity with the citizens and state of Ukraine, including their representatives in this hemicycle, I again ask you to observe with me a moment of silence. Thank you. Dear colleagues, we will maintain our focus on the consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine during this session with a view to generating new ideas on how Ukraine can be supported in a useful and meaningful way and how peace based on justice can be brought back to Europe. On Thursday, a joint urgent affairs debate is proposed on political consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, including a possible ban of Russian and Belarusian athletes from the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. We will also discuss the challenges faced by the Belarusians in exile who oppose, as we do, the illegal support of Belarusian authorities to Russia's war of aggression. More bad news, more sad news. I refer to the tragic fate of almost 80 migrants who lost their lives when a fishing boat carrying more than 700 people sank off the Greek coast. This toll may still rise as hundreds of people remain missing. Such a horrific accident reminds us of tens of thousands of people who tragically died over the last decade trying to reach Europe, our continent, and underlines the importance of addressing this issue in a concerted, holistic and rights-based manner. We have to end this massacre in the Mediterranean. Venons-en la bonne nouvelle. Cette session est la première après le sommet véritablement historique de Reykjavik, tenu à la mi-mai, qui a réuni les dirigeants de la quasi-totalité de nos États membres. Ceux-ci sont engagés ainsi que leur État à respecter la déclaration de Reykjavik. Cette déclaration, que vous devriez toutes et tous lire attentivement et garder constamment à l'esprit, servira de programme ambitieux et prospectif à l'ensemble du Conseil de l'Europe, dont notre Assemblée. Collègues, je suis fier du fait que de nombreuses décisions prises à Reykjavik semblent s'inspirer des idées formulées au sein de l'Assemblée. Permettez-moi de remercier tous ceux et toutes celles qui y ont contribué au cours de l'année écoulée au sein des commissions, des groupes politiques et des délégations nationales. Je profite aussi de cette occasion pour remercier de nouveau notre secrétaire général et le comité des ministres qui sont attachés à inscrire ces idées dans les décisions concrètes adoptées par nos chefs d'État et de gouvernement. Permettez-moi aussi de saluer une fois de plus la coopération dont nous avons bénéficié de la part de la secrétaire générale et du comité des ministres pour préparer le sommet de Reykjavik. Je me réjouis de la proposition du sommet de renforcer encore notre coopération, en particulier au sein du comité mixte de l'Assemblée et du comité des ministres. Nous nous réunirons à nouveau cette semaine sous cette forme pour discuter de la manière dont la déclaration de Reykjavik peut servir de feuille de route claire et stimulante pour aider et protéger et à reconstruire une Ukraine souveraine, pour rétablir un multilatéralisme européen fondé sur des règles, pour renforcer la démocratie dans l'ensemble de nos États membres afin de mieux protéger tous nos citoyens et pour permettre au Conseil de l'Europe de rester le garant de l'État de droit, des droits de l'homme et de la démocratie sur tout le continent. Dans ce contexte, chers collègues, l'échange de vues de cette semaine au sein de l'Assemblée sur le budget et les priorités du Conseil de l'Europe pour 2024-2027 prend tout son sens. Nous devons discuter de la manière dont les décisions du sommet peuvent être mises en œuvre au mieux dans les années à venir, notamment par l'Assemblée. J'invite tous les États membres, après l'adoption de la déclaration de Reykjavik, à joindre l'acte à la parole. Our agenda this week includes an urgent debate on the very worrying situation in the Latvian corridor, where tension between Armenia and Azerbaijan remains high, and as a consequence, people who depend on the accessibility of this corridor are under extremely heavy pressure. We will hold our regular exchange of views with the President of the Committee of Ministers, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia, Mr. Edgars Rinkēvičs, who will next month assume the post of President of his country. We will also welcome here the President of Slovenia, Madam Nataša Pirc-Musar, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, Mr. Péter Szijjártó. And as always, we will have, of course, our dialogue with the Council of Europe's Secretary General in a few moments. And finally, please allow me to welcome all new members to our Assembly and say thank you very much to those members who will be here with us for the very last time. One of those I would like to mention by name, our former Vice President, Committee Chairperson and Rapporteur on so many issues, my good friend and Dutch colleague, Madam Ria Oomen-Ruijten. Thank you so much, dear Ria, for everything that you have done for this Assembly over the past years. That concludes my opening remarks, and it's now time to go and start our work. The first item on the agenda is the examination of credentials of new members. The names of the representatives and substitutes are in document 15792. If no credentials are challenged, the credentials will be ratified. Are any credentials challenged? I don't see so. So the credentials are ratified, and I welcome our new colleagues. Our next business is to consider the changes proposed in the membership of committees. These are set out in document Commissions 2023-06 revised. Are the proposed changes in the membership of the Assembly's committees agreed to? Do not see any objections, so they are agreed to. Before we examine the draft agenda of this week, the Assembly needs to consider requests for debates under urgent and current affairs procedures. The Bureau has received the following: a request for a debate under urgent procedure on ensuring free and safe access through the Latchin corridor, requested by the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons. A request for a debate under urgent procedure on political consequences of the Russian Federation aggression against Ukraine, requested by the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. A request for a debate under urgent procedure on war of aggression against Ukraine, participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Paris 2024 Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, requested by the 5 political groups, and a request for a current affairs debate on recent political developments in Poland, requested by 5 political groups. At its meeting this morning, the Bureau decided to recommend to the Assembly to hold the 3 debates requested under urgent procedure and the current affairs debate. We now will consider the request for debate under urgent procedure. Does the Assembly agree to the Bureau's recommendation to hold an urgent debate on ensuring free and safe access through the Latchin corridor? I do not see any objection. The Bureau's recommendation is no, it's too hot. What?
Mr. Seydov.
Mr. Seydov.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Sorry, I already raised my hand. I'm completely against of this urgent debate because, unfortunately, this debate could create more problematic issues, more headaches than we have. First time in the history of relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we became so closer to peace. And this intervention could create so negative impacts. And that's why, on behalf of my delegation, of course we will take into account the decision of the Assembly, but this is not the right time to discuss this question, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Seydov. There is an objection to the Bureau's recommendation on the request for an urgent procedure on ensuring free and safe access through the Latchin corridor. We therefore must proceed to a vote. We heard one person speak in favor against holding the debate. Is anybody wishes to speak in favor of holding the debate? Chairperson of the committee concerned, of the Migration Committee. There is. I do not see any need, and we are going. Well, Mr. Rubinian, you want to speak in favor of the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. Regardless of the fact that Armenia and Azerbaijan are negotiating a peace treaty, any kind of debate regarding pressing humanitarian issues and a crisis unfolding in Nagorno-Karabakh is important, and it cannot harm in any way these negotiations. So I'm strongly in favor of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubinian. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on behalf of the Committee on Migration or a representative of the Bureau? I do not see any. The Bureau is in favor, as I told you. We now shall vote on the request for urgent procedure. The decision requires 2/3 majority. Those, is that correct? Those who are in favor of holding this urgent procedure debate should vote yes. Those who are against holding such a debate should vote no. The vote is open. Those who are meeting problems, please put your voting card in the right way in the slot. Is there still anybody engaging technical problems? If that is not the case, and if the problem of Mr. Hihglilghts is solved in a minute, then, Yorgos, you can cast your vote, and then I... Yes, please vote. And then I close the vote. I ask for the results to be displayed. And there is a large majority, more than 3/4, in favor of holding the urgent affairs debate. We now will consider the request for debate on the urgent procedure on political consequences of the Russian Federation's aggression against Ukraine. Does the Assembly agree to the Bureau's recommendation to hold a debate on political consequences of Russian Federation aggression against Ukraine? I now do not see any objection, so the recommendation is accepted, and the request for the urgent procedure is therefore approved. It is proposed that the debate will take place on Thursday, as set out in the draft agenda, and be referred to the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy for report. And the other report is referred to the Committee on Migration and Refugees for report, and it also will take place in a joint debate on Thursday. We will now consider the request for debate under urgent procedure on war of aggression against Ukraine, participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Paris 2024 Olympics. I have been informed that the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media proposes changing the title of the debate to war of aggression against Ukraine, participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Paris 2024 Olympics and Paralympics. Does the Assembly agree to the Bureau's recommendation to hold a debate on the war of aggression against Ukraine, participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympics? I do not see any objection, so therefore the Bureau's recommendation is accepted. The request for urgent procedure is approved, it is proposed that the debate will take place on Thursday as set out in the draft agenda and be referred to the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media for report. The Bureau was in favour of the request for a current affairs debate on the recent political developments in Poland. Does the Assembly agree to the recommendation of the Bureau that there should be a current affairs debate on this topic? I do not see any objection, so the proposal is agreed to. It is proposed that the current affairs debate on recent political developments in Poland will take place on Tuesday. It will be opened by the two co-rapporteurs on Poland, Mr. Péter and Madam Azadeh Royan. Next item of business is the adoption of the agenda for the third part of the 2023 ordinary session. You find it in document 15779, provision 2. The draft agenda submitted for the Assembly's approval was adopted by the Bureau this morning. Is the draft agenda agreed to? I do not see any objection. It's agreed to. The minutes of the meeting of the Standing Committee on 15 May in Reykjavik and on 26th of May in Riga this year have been distributed as document AS/PAR 2023 PV02 and PV03. I invite the Assembly to take note of these minutes. The next item on the agenda is the debate on the progress report of the Bureau and the Standing Committee. You find it in document 15791 and addendum 1 and 2, presented by Mr. Julian Bulaj, the chair of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe. This will be combined with the consideration of the report of the ad hoc committee of the Bureau on the observation of the parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey on the 14th and the 28th of May 2023, presented by Mr. Frank Schwabe. The debate must conclude by 5 p.m. I will therefore interrupt the list of speakers at around 3:55 p.m. I remind speakers that speaking time is 3 minutes. I call Mr. Bulaj to present the progress report. Julian, you have 7 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, dear President. Dear all, before starting my report, I would like to thank both you, President, and to you, Madam Secretary General of PACE, for having this way of sitting. I think this gives more clarity of this Assembly, and I really much appreciate it. So thank you so much for this. It's really a progress within our hemicycle. Chers et chers collègues, le rapport que je vous présente aujourd'hui couvre les activités depuis 28 avril. La période a été très dense et les membres de l'Assemblée se sont montrés très actifs. Le sommet du chef d'État et gouvernement, événement majeur, historique pour notre organisation, s'est tenu à Reykjavik le 16 et 17 mai. Je tiens à féliciter et remercier chaleureusement la secrétaire générale, la délégation et l'ambassadrice islandaise, ainsi que le comité de ministres pour leur engagement et notre réussite commune, mais aussi les collègues du secrétariat de l'Assemblée. La dimension parlementaire du sommet a été assurée par la commission permanente de l'Assemblée qui s'est réunie dans la capitale islandaise la veille du sommet. L'Assemblée parlementaire a pesé de tout son poids politique pour soutenir le sommet en y apportant une contribution substantielle pour le biais de nombreux textes, dont sa recommandation sur le sommet de Reykjavik du Conseil de l'Europe, basée sur le rapport de notre collègue Fiona O'Loughlin. Le président de notre Assemblée, Tiny Kox, a fait entendre à Reykjavik la voix de notre Assemblée, soulignant la nécessité de restaurer, renforcer et peut-être réinventer la sécurité démocratique européenne et le multilatéralisme fondé sur des règles. Il a exprimé le soutien sans réserve de l'Assemblée à la création d'un système complet d'établissement de responsabilité pour l'agression commise par la Russie contre l'Ukraine. Il a réitéré notre soutien sans faille à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Le président a également évoqué l'importance d'inverser le dangereux recul de la démocratie. Enfin, toi, Tiny, tu as insisté sur l'importance de la nouvelle génération du droit humain, dont le droit à l'environnement sain. En tant que l'organe statutaire du Conseil de l'Europe, notre Assemblée doit désormais contribuer à traduire des décisions du sommet en résultats concrets, mais pas seulement. Fidèle à son rôle de monteur politique de l'organisation, elle devra toujours faire le pas de plus, le pas qui donnera l'impulsion nécessaire pour aller au-delà de cette orientation décidée à Reykjavik. Moins de 2 semaines après le sommet de Reykjavik, l'Assemblée parlementaire s'est penchée à Riga sur les suites à donner aux décisions prises au sommet. La Commission permanente a ainsi tenu un débat d'actualité sur la suivi du sommet et a adopté une déclaration. Il faut poursuivre notre travail. Face à l'urgence démocratique et climatique, on n'a pas de temps à perdre. Et nous comptons sur la présidence lettonne pour incarner cette impulsion. Notre position unique en tant que membre de l'Assemblée parlementaire et en tant que membre des parlements nationaux nous confère une responsabilité particulière. Le rôle d'Assemblée ne se limite pas à Strasbourg. En tant que législateurs nationaux, nous devrons veiller à ce que la déclaration de Reykjavik fasse l'objet d'un suivi au niveau national. Dear colleagues, not a day passes without war crimes being committed because of the Russian Federation's war of aggression against Ukraine that remind us of the very reasons of the summit and for the strong message of unity expressed by the heads of states and governments. On 6 June 2023, the Council of Europe's leaders, the Secretary General, the Chair of the Committee of Ministers and the President of our Assembly issued a joint statement condemning in the strongest possible terms the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam in the Kherson region in Ukraine. They stressed that such a reckless act triggered the displacement of numerous civilians and endangered their lives. Its dangerous consequences for the environment, energy, security and nuclear safety are a grave concern for the whole continent. We condemn the destruction of the dam as a terrorist attack from the Russian side, and we continue to condemn and demand justice over the Russian Federation's war of aggression. Dear colleagues, our resolve, our political will, as well as our political weight are more needed than ever. Let us not fail. So let's transcribe the words of the Reykjavik Declaration into action. As always, it starts with the means. Let's put the money where our mouth is. We will have on Wednesday, in the framework of our debate on the budget, the opportunity to push for the summit's decision to be reflected immediately into the Council of Europe's daily work. To effectively deliver on the summit's outcomes, the member states need to allocate the necessary resources. I strongly encourage you to participate actively in this debate at home, as the implementation of the Reykjavik Declaration should be at the center of the organization's program and budget. The Assembly must call on member states to invest sufficient additional resources into the Council of Europe, zero and above zero real growth, in order to allow it to effectively deliver on the summit's outcomes and to respond to member states and citizens' expectations. The need to match resources to ambition should be at the forefront of the discussions in the Committee of Ministers during the upcoming budgetary process. Another very important issue currently on the agenda of our Assembly and of our organization is the application for membership of Kosovo. Our Assembly has a great role to play in this process. It will produce an opinion to the Committee of Ministers. I really hope we will have a rapid, efficient and successful process. Now allow me to tackle another issue that raises concern. Last week, the European Commission announced it is suing Poland over a law creating a special body to probe Russian influence in Polish politics, which critics say violates the Polish constitution and could be used to intimidate political opponents. This is very serious, and I understand that the Monitoring Committee expressed the wish to request an urgent opinion of the Venice Commission on this law. This is to be considered by the committee this week. Today, I feel duty-bound to once again denounce the ongoing tragedy that unfolds on the European shores in the Mediterranean Sea. Thousands of children, women, and men have died, have drowned while trying to reach European soil in makeshift and overcrowded boats. No later than last week, we witnessed one more time an awful tragedy off the coast of Greece, with hundreds and hundreds of deaths, women and children trapped below deck of a sinking boat that has gone down in a matter of minutes. One of the worst, if not the worst, maritime disaster in recent European history. The Assembly has been consistent in calling for zero tolerance towards lives lost at sea, recommending clear, binding and common standards for search and rescue operation. We ask for further commitment to assisting coastal states and demand to end obstruction for private vessels to conduct rescues. The Assembly also called for the creation of safe legal channels to Europe, further harmonization of common asylum procedures, and solidarity. Last week's catastrophe once again reveals the crucial need for Europe and the rest of the world to fill in the gaps in the legal framework, policies and practices of rescue at sea, but also our migration policies. Now, on a more positive note, I would also like to highlight the launching by our Assembly of the Vigdis Finnbogadóttir Prize for Women's Empowerment, a joint initiative of the Assembly with the government of Iceland. The Vigdis Prize was launched in Reykjavik in May in the presence of the former Icelandic president, Vigdis Finnbogadóttir, the first woman in the world to be elected as the head of state. The Vigdis Prize will reward outstanding initiatives which promote the empowerment of women. The prize will be presented during each June part session of the Parliamentary Assembly. I would also like to highlight the good news that the European Union is about to finalize the ratification procedure of the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. 6 years after signing the convention in 2017, in May, the European Parliament gave its consent to the European Council to adopt the decisions on ratification. Although the precise and detailed impact of this ratification is not fully clear as yet, it means that the 6 remaining EU states not having ratified the convention, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania and Slovakia, will be both under pressure to ratify directly and under an obligation to implement and follow the convention.
Now you have to come to a conclusion, Julian.
I'll have just 1 more minute left and I will be very brief.
Sorry, no. I already gave you 3 extra minutes, so you have not one, even in Romania, you have not 1 minute left. You already have taken 3 and I allowed you to do so. So make your final sentence and that is it for today, I would say.
Dear colleagues, I'll stop here. I'm looking forward to listen to our colleague Frank Schwabes for a report on Turkey, and also my dear colleague Damian Coté on the report on the election conference in Switzerland. And in front of you, I'm thanking the chair of the Turkish delegation who is about to leave our assembly. Dear Ahmet Yildiz, thank you so much for your presence here, and good luck with your further work. Thank you so much to all of you for listening.
Thank you so much, Julian. But take care. I was gentle allowing you extra minutes, but if you then steal 2 minutes more, that makes me a bit less gentle. But you had indeed to deal with 2 standing committees, and that's something more, and a summit. Now I give the floor to Mr. Frank Schwab to present the report of the ad hoc committee of the Bureau on the observation of the parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey. Frank, you have 3 minutes.
3. Okay, this is not possible in 3 minutes, so I hope because I have what should I say in 3 minutes, Mr. President? These are very important elections with 2 rounds. For each round, maybe for each round 3 minutes? No. So, Mr. President, anyhow, I had the honor to lead the election of the Asian delegation in the Assembly. Of the Assembly in Turkey on the 14th of May and the second round on the 28th of May. I would like to thank the authorities to invite us to the country, and I really thank the Turkish delegation. Ahmet Yildiz is the chair for the hospitality. At the end, we were there 3 times in 6 weeks, and as you know, we make our election observation mission as always, as usually, together with OSCE, and this is very necessary to do it together and to have our common findings. I would like to remind you that when it comes to elections, we always have to do 2 things. Sometimes we forget one thing, or someone don't want that we look into 2 things. The first thing is what is going on the election day, and the second thing is to look into the environment of elections. On the election day, we have to say, in Turkey, finally in the first round and in the second round, the will of the people at the end is the result of the election. This is very, very clear for us. But the second thing is that we have to say that the elections didn't take place in an environment we ask as the Council of Europe as conditions for democratic elections. This is true as well because we have a lot of limitations of fundamental rights in the country. We have a situation where we have a kind of self-censorship in the media, not just in the public media. We have a lot of, it's not easy to say just to have a better situation. The situation is between a little bit like 0 and 100% between the one who was the opposition candidate and the candidate from the ruling party. So that is far away from a level playing field. We don't have the fulfillment of basic and fundamental judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, and that brings the country into a situation where democratic elections are not very easy to hold. If I have to say something in a few seconds, then I really urge to implement the recommendations from a lot of bodies of our organization, from the monitoring procedures and from the Venice Commission. And the most important thing maybe at the end is the SEC. What is the SEC? The SEC is a Central Electoral Council. In Turkey, this council have the most rights you can imagine worldwide. At the end, there is no possibility for any court to change the decision of the SEC, and the problem is that it's really very, very intransparent and not very clear for us how the SEC at the end is working. I think it was a little bit better in the second round than in the first round, but it was still difficult. Usually we can monitor the elections very well. People were friendly towards us, but especially in the first round, a lot of people were not aware what is an international observation election mission, and so we had difficulties to reach and to get into some polling stations, and even in some we could not monitor the elections. So it was better in the second round, but I still urge the Turkish authorities to inform the people about it. Finally, I think whoever is a new government, we have a new government, and we don't care if it's the old president or it would be a new president. There are obligations from Turkey to this organization, and the fundamental obligation is to fulfill the judgment of the court, and I think we have to ask Turkey to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swabe, for presenting the report of your ad hoc committee on the observation of the parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey. Now in the debate, we are first going to listen to the 5 speakers on behalf of the political groups. First in the debate, I call Mr. Max Lux from Germany. He speaks on behalf of the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Max, 3 minutes.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, unsere Parlamentarische Versammlung setzt sich aus 306 Abgeordneten und 306 Stellvertretern zusammen. Das ist die Anzahl der Menschen, die am letzten Mittwoch vor der Küste Griechenlands verunglückt ist. Und mit jedem Menschen, der im Mittelmeer stirbt, stirbt ein Stück der europäischen Zivilisation, die wir hier verteidigen wollen. Und es genügt, sich vorzustellen, wir hätten in diesem Boot gesessen, Dieser fundamentale Bruch der Zivilisation auf dem Mittelmeer, er muss endlich enden und wir müssen dafür viel stärker als bisher an unsere nationalen Regierungen appellieren. Vom Gipfel in Reykjavik hätte ich mir ein viel klareres Signal in der Flüchtlingspolitik, ein klares Signal für die Seenotrettung gewünscht. Der Gipfel hat dennoch an anderen Stellen gute Ergebnisse geliefert, beispielsweise beim Schadensregister, bei der Stärkung der Menschenrechtsbeauftragten hier im Europarat. Darauf gilt es jetzt aufzubauen. Darauf gilt es jetzt aufzubauen, uns umso stärker für Klimagerechtigkeit, für unsere Jugendzentren, für Minderheiten einzusetzen. Aber erlauben Sie mir, auf eine Sache hinzuweisen, auf eines der größten Probleme unserer Institution, nämlich die mangelnde Umsetzung von Urteilen des Europäischen Gerichtshofs für Menschenrechte. Und wie könnten wir über diesen Gerichtshof sprechen, ohne diejenigen zu erwähnen, die sich auf ihn verlassen? Es herrscht zu viel Schweigen. Es herrscht zu viel Schweigen über Osman Kavala. Es herrscht zu viel Schweigen über Selahattin Demirtas und all jene, die ihre Hoffnung auf uns setzen. Und wir müssen ihnen klar sagen, dass wir sie nicht vergessen, sondern dass wir entschlossen an ihrer Seite stehen. Die rechtswidrige Inhaftierung von Osman Kavala und Selahattin Demirtas zeigt das unfaire Umfeld der vergangenen Parlamentswahl in der Türkei. Und es zeigt, wie sehr Präsident Erdogan Angst macht. Und das greift auch der Bericht klar auf. Mein herzlicher Dank gilt aber auch allen Delegationsmitgliedern, die sich an dieser Wahlbeobachtungsmission beteiligt und sie ermöglicht haben. Und wir als Menschenrechtspolitikerinnen und Politiker in diesem Europarat haben nach dieser vergangenen Wahl umso mehr die Pflicht, an der Seite derjenigen zu stehen, die auf uns setzen, an der Seite der Demokratinnen und Demokraten gegen die Einschränkungen der Presse- und Meinungsfreiheit, aber auch Vetternwirtschaft müssen wir viel klarer als bisher benennen. Präsident Erdogan hat sich nach seiner Wiederwahl einen neuen Erzfeind erschaffen. Er hat gegen Lesben, Schwule, Bisexuelle und Transpersonen in einer ungekannten Art und Weise gehetzt. Aber wir LGBT-Personen, wir sind keine Spielbälle für diese Politik und die Europäische Menschenrechtskonvention kennt keine Ausnahmeklausel für LGBT-Personen. Stoppen Sie diese Hetze, Herr Präsident Erdogan. Danke.
Dankeschön, Max. Now in the debate I call Mr. Alexander Péter from Poland, and Alexander speaks on behalf of the European People's Party. Alexander, 3 minutes.
Dear President, dear colleagues, the ambitious conclusions of the Fourth Council of Europe Summit oblige us to reflect on our organization post-Reykjavik. The ambitions of our heads of states and governments require that we walk to walk in achieving the ambitious plans let out in Iceland. The enlarged partial agreement on the register of damage caused by the aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine needs to be implemented and financed both in monetary and human terms. And I take this opportunity to thank again all of you who contributed to make this summit happen. We need a clear path forward, and having outlined our objectives, our head of state and government stressed that the organization needs the finance to complete the task. In parallel, the political groups at the Assembly often referred to as the motor, the beating heart of the institution, have been starved of resources and must now be given the financial aid needed to continue their work and to plan for a stable future. In consequence, I invite our Secretaries General both to contribute not only for the bigger finance of this institution, but also to increase the group's budgets. The Assembly will this week debate and adopt 2 financial reports aimed at ensuring this within both the Assembly and of the institution as whole, and we look forward to discuss the discussions in the Joint Committee on the follow-up of the summit. Last but not least, we shall make increased pressure on our parliaments and governments in order to implement Strasbourg Court rulings. This court is the most pressure part of our organization, and we shall do our best to make it functioning and being relevant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Alexander. La prochaine oratrice est Madame Mireille Clapeau de la France, au nom du groupe ADLE. Mireille, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers collègues, au nom du groupe ALDE, j'ai d'abord une pensée pour nos collègues d'Ukraine et le peuple ukrainien, alors que la guerre d'agression russe se poursuit inlassablement depuis maintenant près d'1 an et demi. Je voudrais mentionner aussi le conflit entre l'Arménie et l'Azerbaïdjan. Nous devons appliquer les mesures d'urgence décidées par la Cour, l'ordonnance de libre circulation, pour améliorer la situation humanitaire dans le Haut-Karabakh due au blocus dans le corridor de Latchine. Notre débat d'urgence lors de cette session permettra, je l'espère, d'avancer sur ce sujet. Alors, le sommet de Reykjavik a été une étape très constructive, vous l'avez dit, avec des livrables importants, en particulier la création d'un registre international des dommages causés par l'agression de la Russie. 43 pays y ont souscrit, espérons qu'il y en aura d'autres et que cet outil sera opérationnel dès que possible. Au titre du processus de Reykjavik sur droits de l'homme et environnement, citons également notre résolution sur l'impact environnemental et les conflits armés, les terribles conséquences humaines et environnementales de la destruction du barrage de Kakhovka ont démontré l'urgence d'agir également sur ces aspects, comme l'a souligné le président Boulay. Permettez-moi cependant de me focaliser sur les scrutins observés par notre Assemblée et en particulier sur les élections présidentielles et législatives en Turquie, puisque j'ai eu l'honneur de m'y rendre 3 fois en qualité d'observatrice pour le groupe ALDE dans la délégation présidée par Frank Schwab. De façon générale, les élections sont restées équitables et ont été relativement bien gérées, et ce, malgré de terribles défis logistiques et sociaux posés par les séismes de février dernier. J'ai pu en être directement témoin le 14 mai lorsque je me trouvais à Gaziantep et à Islahiye, cette ville dite des containers, une des plus touchées. La mobilisation des assesseurs dans les bureaux de vote tôt le matin, tout au long de la journée, et le taux de participation proche de 90% témoignent de la vitalité démocratique du peuple turc. Néanmoins, c'est bien en amont de l'échéance électorale que les irrégularités et restrictions des droits fondamentaux ont impacté la régularité du scrutin. D'abord, la presse, il faut le dire, a largement favorisé le président sortant Erdogan. Ensuite, les campagnes ont été extrêmement polarisées et marquées par des déclarations incendiaires et provocatrices, en particulier dans l'entre-deux tours. Aussi, il semble que le pouvoir aurait fait un usage illégitime de ressources publiques en offrant des cadeaux électoraux à la population. Enfin, la Commission suprême électorale manque d'indépendance par rapport au pouvoir et a refusé de rencontrer notre délégation. Pour finir, ces élections qui se sont conclues par la reconduction du président Erdogan contre son concurrent Kılıçdaroğlu et la victoire du parti au pouvoir, ces élections ont été reconnues régulières et justes, autant par l'APCE que l'OSCE. Malgré nos inquiétudes, espérons pour le peuple et la démocratie turque que ce nouveau mandat soit placé sous le signe d'une véritable séparation des pouvoirs et d'un respect des oppositions. Et la Turquie pourrait déjà appliquer les arrêts de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme pour ouvrir une nouvelle ère sous de meilleurs auspices.
Merci, Mireille. Now I call on debate Mr. John Howell from the United Kingdom, speaking on behalf of the European Conservative Group. John, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate Frank Schwab, not just for his leadership of the team, but also he may not have thought his 3 minutes was long enough, but he managed to get into that 3 minutes everything that I wanted to say. So I shall be repeating a lot of what he said. But I think one of the things that he stressed, which is very, very important, is the presence of rapporteurs on the pre-election mission. It is really important that we do have people who know the country as part of that pre-election mission. And the reason for that is because election observation missions are twofold in the way in which they are structured. The first is to look at the environment to make sure that we understand the environment in which those elections take place. And the second is to look at the process by which those elections take place. Now, if we look at the environment in Turkey, there are plenty of questions. It is not directly, many of them are not directly related to the election, but they influence the context in which those elections take place. If we look, there are still objections to Sweden from the Turkish government joining NATO. And of course, we still have the arrest of Osman Kavala, who I was able to see on a previous occasion. Frank has mentioned too the self-censorship that takes place in the press and media that goes way beyond anything that we would see in a normal Western country. When it comes to the process of the election, then that is a completely different thing. The process of the elections in Turkey, I think, were fair. That was witnessed by the large number of people who participated in those elections and whose votes were cast. I think that a large number of people have stressed that. But it is important that we remember too that the environment was not up to the standards that we would have expected from a member of this organization when it conducts elections. And I just want to finish by stressing the situation with regard to Mr. Kavala. He is not the only person that is in prison in Turkey, but he became for us the symbol that looks at all of the other prisoners are there. He is the principal symbol that has had 2 European Court of Human Rights judgments made to get him free. And I hope that in my time as rapporteur, that I will be able to come to this assembly and to say with absolute confidence, Mr. Kavala is free. That is what I want to achieve, and that is what I hope everyone here wants me to achieve.
Thank you, John. And the last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Mr. André Hunkel from Germany on behalf of the Unified European Left. André, you have 3 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Es ist gut, dass in Reykjavik die Staats- und Regierungschefs des Europarates erst zum 4. Mal übrigens in der Geschichte zusammengekommen sind. Und ich kann sagen, ich hoffe, dass nicht wieder 18 Jahre vergehen, bis der nächste Gipfel stattfindet, sondern dass das häufiger stattfindet. Dennoch würde ich gerne ein paar kritische Beobachtungen anmerken, die ich auch im Standing Committee in Reykjavik gemacht habe. Ich habe den Eindruck, dass unser Diskurs im Europarat bezüglich Menschenrechten, aber auch bezüglich etwa des Krieges in der Ukraine sich mehr und mehr entkoppelt von dem Diskurs in anderen Teilen dieser Welt, etwa vom UN-Menschenrechtsrat. Und ich will den Vorschlag hier wiederholen, den ich gemacht habe, dass wir stärker in die Kommunikation mit dessen gehen, was oft als globaler Süden bezeichnet wird, etwa durch eine Einladung von Lula da Silva hier in die Versammlung. Dennoch gab es gute, auch wichtige Punkte, die auch benannt worden sind. Ich will noch mal erwähnen, auch die Notwendigkeit des Beitritts der EU zur Europäischen Menschenrechtskonvention und auch vor allen Dingen die Stärkung des Gerichtshofes. Zur Wahl in der Türkei. Ich stimme allem zu, was Frank Schwabe gesagt hat. Ich will aber erwähnen, dass 2 unserer Mitglieder, die wir hier bestimmt haben, von der Versammlung nicht teilnehmen konnten, weil sie sozusagen die Türkei angekündigt hat, dass sie nicht ins Land gelassen werden. Das ist Sibel Arslan von der sozialistischen Fraktion und meine Wenigkeit. Und das Gleiche gilt für 2 Beobachter der OSZE, hier unser Kollege Sören Sondergaard und auch eine schwedische Sozialdemokratin. Wir können das nicht akzeptieren. Es muss ganz klar, wir haben zurückgezogen, Sibel Arslan und ich. Wir wollten den Prozess nicht weiter eskalieren und sozusagen eine volle Delegation ermöglichen. Aber ich finde, wir können das nicht akzeptieren. Ansonsten stimme ich allem zu, was Frank Schwabe gesagt hat. Und zum Schluss will ich auf einen wichtigen Punkt noch mal hinweisen, der noch nicht angesprochen worden ist, nämlich den Fall von Julian Assange. Letzte Woche hat ein Richter nach 9 Monaten alle Berufungsgründe mit einem Paper-Verfahren, sagt man, einem Papierverfahren, zurückgewiesen, und die Auslieferung von Julian Assange ist so nahe gerückt wie nie. Ich finde, dass der Europarat und die Menschenrechtskonvention hier wirklich eine besondere Verantwortung hat. Ich hoffe, liebe britischen Kollegen, auch, dass Großbritannien, falls der Straßburger Gerichtshof angerufen wird, dass die Autorität dieses Gerichtshofs respektiert wird. Ich ende alle meine Reden mittlerweile im Bundestag seit letzter Woche in Anlehnung an Cato, ceterum censo, Assangem esse libertandum. Im Übrigen bin ich der Meinung, dass Assange sofort freigelassen werden sollte. Vielen Dank.
Dankeschön, André. Prochain orateur est M. Damien Cotier de la Suisse. Damien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Lorsque je suis arrivé au Conseil de l'Europe, les personnes qui étaient là depuis plus longtemps que moi m'ont dit « Observer les élections est une des meilleures choses que nous faisons dans cette institution, une des choses les plus utiles. » Une des, je souligne, évidemment. Il y en a de nombreuses autres, et c'était vrai. Et le Conseil de l'Europe s'est posé la question des impacts des crises actuelles qui traversent notre monde sur l'observation électorale. Et en tant que président de la délégation suisse, j'aimerais remercier l'Assemblée parlementaire d'avoir proposé que cette conférence soit organisée à Berne. Elle a eu lieu les 9 et 10 mai. Vous y étiez, Monsieur le Président, vous l'avez ouverte avec le président du Conseil national suisse, avec le président du Congrès et avec la présidente de la Commission de Venise. Et un grand nombre de personnes et d'organisations étaient représentées, les différents services du Conseil de l'Europe, le Congrès, la Commission de Venise, mais aussi d'autres organisations internationales, comme l'OSCE, ODIHR, International IDEA, le monde académique, la société civile et de nombreux représentants de commissions électorales nationales de nos différents pays membres. Il s'agissait de faire une réflexion sur la manière d'observer les élections dans ce monde qui est régulièrement en crise. Nous avons tous connu la pandémie, bien évidemment, qui a été très disruptive dans nos processus électoraux. Nous avons vu qu'un pays, la Turquie, malheureusement, a été frappé par un tremblement de terre qui a posé des défis en matière d'organisation électorale. Malheureusement, un de nos membres, l'Ukraine, est soumise à une guerre qui rend difficile l'organisation d'élections. Et on connaît tous l'impact de la société digitale et maintenant de l'intelligence artificielle sur les processus électoraux. Suite à des débats constructifs pendant 2 jours, cette conférence est arrivée à une conclusion, une déclaration finale, que certains appellent la déclaration de Berne et que je résumerai en 2 mots, adaptation et anticipation. Il faut adapter nos processus électoraux à ce monde qui évolue et à ces crises, et il faut anticiper ces crises et se donner à l'avance des règles. Comment est-ce que notre pays, tel pays, va réagir, tel processus électoral va être adapté s'il devait y avoir une crise? Ce sont des questions qu'il faut se poser avant que la crise intervienne. Alors, concernant l'observation électorale, cela implique notamment que nos organisations adaptent leur manière de travailler. À l'époque, finalement, nous observions les élections sur 1 jour avec un scrutin qui était principalement organisé sur du papier. Aujourd'hui, il y a de multiples formes possibles et souvent ce processus est beaucoup plus long. On parle même de cycles électoraux qui peuvent durer sur plusieurs mois ou années. Et probablement qu'il faut que nous repensions nos méthodes de travail, la déclaration de principe, peut-être même le code de bonne conduite de la Commission de Venise. La déclaration de Berne, à ce propos, nous donne une feuille de route qui nous permettra d'agir ces prochains temps. Et il serait souhaitable que notre Assemblée travaille sur un rapport spécifique qui donne un suivi à ces recommandations de Berne et peut-être une résolution de notre Assemblée. Et je termine, Monsieur le Président, en disant que notre Conseil peut certainement prendre le lead pour soutenir l'Ukraine dans l'organisation de ses premières élections après la guerre, parce que ce sera un défi énorme pour ce pays et notre organisation, avec d'autres, peut l'aider à le faire. Et là aussi, la déclaration de Berne donne quelques conseils en la matière et quelques pistes que nous pouvons suivre. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Damien. Next speaker in the debate will be Mr. Hihglilghts from Turkey. You have the floor, Ahmed.
Mr. President, first of all, I thank both rapporteurs And in my absence in the next term, I wish the Assembly an efficient follow-up to the conclusions of the summit. First of all, of course, on one issue is the implementation of the ECHR verdicts. The Assembly should think about what to do, as I raised today in the Bureau. What to do if the Committee of Ministers continues the selective enforcement of the verdicts of the court. Today, the reply of the Secretary General was not efficient to me. She said some decisions are difficult to be implemented politically for some countries. So it is a selective and discriminatory approach by the Committee of Ministers. When it comes to the elections in Turkey, I am proud of the maturity and wisdom of Turkish people, Turkish voters. The turnout is exemplary, so the Assembly should be proud of it. The conduct of the elections was close to the perfect. Despite the damage by earthquake, despite the difficulties by the destruction of the earthquake, and these Turkish elections constitute the big step, an exemplary step after the conference in Bern about the elections during the crisis. So it is exemplary in many ways. I disagree with some comments. The legal framework in any country may be different from the others, so maybe the environment. So the division of labors between the electoral bodies, it doesn't mean that it is less efficient than others. Up to now, the turnout and regardless of the result proved that Turkish people and the government's authorities care about the elections more than anybody else. On the criticism by some colleagues, especially from Germany, they say that environment was not good and some concerns of fear. I should remind that the turnout may be better if the German authorities allow establishment of voting stations in some towns we requested. Unfortunately, they limited it. In some towns, in some regions, Turkish citizens couldn't vote. So, I think that Turkish people and Turkish authorities deserve a congratulation on the conduct of the elections. On the environment, electoral environment and the general situation, we discussed this in a monitoring committee. We have also some valid counter questions on this. At the end, I thank the rapporteurs, members of the observing mission. We had some minor problems, disputes about this. We solved them with spirit of cooperation, spirit of dialogue. On the other hand,
could you conclude?
Mr. President, the so-called accident, boat accident in the Aegean in the Greek coast. We have a saying in Turkish, some accidents come when we see it, when we predict it. Unfortunately, we raised this issue several times. It was not efficiently addressed by the EU authorities. I hope from now on, our Committee on Migration, our Assembly and EU authorities will be more caring about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. I allowed you some seconds more because this is your last appearance in our hemicycle, and you know that we appreciate it very much for you being with us. Next speaker in the debate is Madam Ripsim Grigoryan from Armenia. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, President. Later this week, we will be debating very specific topics under urgent procedure. As just mentioned, the horrendous war in Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis in the blocked Latin corridor. And while we're here to tackle existing issues, Azerbaijan just several hours ago opened fire in the direction of a metallurgical plant being now built in Armenia with the involvement of foreign investments. Attention, please, dear colleagues, not in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Armenia. Just a week ago, on June 13, the Azerbaijani side had again opened fire, which was preceded by false accusations against Armenia, while we have stated that the construction of the plant fully complies with the international obligations of Armenia, and that Azerbaijan's false concerns are simply aimed at hindering Armenia's economic development and foreign investments. As a result of shooting, 2 citizens of Indian origin working on the construction were wounded and undergone surgeries. Azerbaijan demonstrates overt disregard towards Armenia's territorial integrity, human rights, and international law, and this should come to the attention of the international community. We need to take actions to curb Azerbaijan's expansionist ambitions and unacceptable policy of use of force to achieve their goals. Ironically, the environmental protection has been used by Azerbaijan again when for months the Lachin corridor has been blocked by so-called eco-activists. And what happened to their environmental demands? That they stopped protesting after the illegal checkpoint was established on the corridor in the end of April. I leave this with no comment. And now, 4 days ago, on June 15, Azerbaijani side has made another provocation. A group of Azerbaijani soldiers tried to establish a flag on the Armenian territory. What can be seen from the footage on the spot? The Russian peacekeeping forces have been accompanying them. This is a very serious matter, and Armenia called for an investigation to understand the circumstances of this provocation. Using this provocation as an alibi, Azerbaijan has blocked the traffic through the corridor completely. To make it clear, if previously the International Red Cross could transfer emergency food and medicine, now the traffic is completely stopped. So we're now not talking about a possible humanitarian crisis, but a crisis which is possible very soon if we take no action. And dear colleagues, I believe that now we're left in a situation to take a decisive action. A presidential committee should visit the Lachin corridor to have a chance to evaluate the situation on the ground. We need to send a signal. We need to take this step, not for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, but to reinforce that while there is war in Europe, in Ukraine, no country can take advantage and carry out ethnic cleansing under the close or busy eyes of all of us. We should stand by our values to protect the human rights, to protect people when their lives and right to live in their homes is attacked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. La prochaine oratrice est Madame Marie-Christine Dalloz de la France. Marie-Christine, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Messieurs les rapporteurs, chers collègues, mon propos se limitera au rapport de M. Schwab, que je remercie pour la qualité de son travail. Les élections législatives et présidentielles qui ont eu lieu en Turquie en mai dernier, quelques mois seulement après les séismes meurtriers ayant touché le sud du pays et le nord de la Syrie, ont suscité un grand intérêt dans l'opinion internationale, car les sondages laissaient envisager une possible alternance politique alors que ce pays est dirigé depuis 20 ans par M. Erdogan. J'ai eu l'opportunité de me rendre à Ankara pour observer ces élections, pour le premier tour des élections législatives et présidentielles. Il faut saluer tout d'abord la très forte implication des électeurs avec un taux de participation de 87% pour les élections législatives et le premier tour de l'élection présidentielle et 84% pour le second tour de l'élection présidentielle. L'accès au bureau de vote s'est fait dans le calme et la sérénité. Il n'y a aucune tension à déplorer. La polarisation et les invectives qui avaient pu marquer la campagne électorale n'ont pas engendré de perturbations le jour du vote. Les citoyens ont souhaité exercer leurs droits dans un contexte respectueux des règles démocratiques et il faut s'en réjouir. D'un point de vue organisationnel, tous les électeurs ont été soumis aux mêmes procédures, quel que soit le bureau de vote dont ils dépendaient. Le processus électoral était très clair et la seule difficulté à laquelle les électeurs ont été confrontés était d'ordre pratique. La taille des bulletins de vote pour les élections législatives, 1 mètre de long, rendait le pliage complexe et la mise sous enveloppe compliquée. Enfin, j'ai pu constater que le dépouillement a été effectué dans le respect des procédures électorales. De fait, les résultats n'ont pas été contestés. Les séismes de février dernier avaient engendré des réactions de désarroi et de crispation face à l'inertie des secours. La campagne électorale, parfois agressive, avait laissé craindre une exaspération des tensions. Malgré ce contexte qui semblait incertain, la Turquie a franchi cette double étape électorale de manière parfaitement régulière dans le processus électoral. À l'heure où certains États membres font face à un désintérêt durable d'une grande partie de leurs citoyens pour les élections, l'attachement de la société turque aux règles démocratiques électorales est à saluer. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, chère Marie-Christine. Next speaker in the debate is Mr. Samet Seder from Azerbaijan. Samet, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are proud on you, Turkey. We are proud on you, Turkiye. You have done really great job for democracy, for future of the region, for stability, for your nation. You are able to manage so very many threats which unfortunately existing in the region. And that's really very strange. Instead of support, we can see a lot of criticism. We are, as an immediate neighbor to Turkey, we were able to see how difficult, how transparent, and how open elections have been organized. 2 rounds, especially second round, gave possibility to understand that Turkey on the right path and on the path of democracy. And Turkey today needs support from this assembly, from international community, because in a very difficult surrounding, after the terrible earthquake, they did what they should do for Council of Europe, but first of all, for their own nation. Thank you, Turkey, for that. And a couple of words for my Armenian colleague. We are very close to each other. Negotiations between President of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister Mashinyan are going on. Next week, another one round of negotiations will be. And could you see the rhetoric of my colleague from Armenia? They are dreaming with past terminology. They are not able to think about the future. Blockade, which is not existing. So-called genocide, which is absolutely out of agenda. Closing the Lachin corridor, which absolutely wrong opinion. Provocations from Armenia, not from Azerbaijan. Hostilities, unfortunately, we can see. And instead of understanding that where we are, in which direction we should go, that we should sit together directly, Azerbaijanis and Armenians, we should think about the future. They are begging to international organizations. They try to present Azerbaijan in a wrong way. This is not the right position. With these attitudes, you are not able to achieve the peace. Come to us. Come to the region. Be Caucasian people. Have a little bit courage to understand the new reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samet. The last speaker in the debate will be Madam Petra Bayer from Austria. You have the floor, Petra.
Thank you very much, Tini. I would like to take the occasion in my role as General Rapporteur on combating racism and intolerance to inform you and to share some information about the progress the Parliamentary No Hate Alliance made. We had the possibility to meet in May in Vienna in the new refurbished parliament for a seminar where we not only had the chance to dive deeper to the root causes of racism and intolerance and learn how NGOs are working to empower those who are targeted by racism and intolerance. We also had the chance to learn how police can not only very actively and proactively take over reports when it hate occurs, but also how they can produce evidence, disaggregated data by taking over these reports, data which is very important for us to make evidence-based politics on how to combat racism. And we also learned how ombudsman institutions, how they can work to empower and to help victims of racism, of intolerance, and how they can take influence on how to change legislation and also the society as a whole in their approaches, that racism has no space anymore. And last but not least, we had the chance also to exchange with the Fundamental Rights Agency, with Michael O'Flaherty as CEO of the FRA. And of course, we know for many years, because we get a lot of information and data, that the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union does very similar work as we do. And I think that we can even foster synergies in the future, because we deal with the same issues and we have the same values and ideas how to overcome racism and intolerance. What I also would like to share with you is that I'm really very happy and proud that today we had 8 signatories of the European Charter, of the Charter for European Parties against racism and for inclusive societies. I really want to encourage all of you who are interested in this work, not only maybe to consider to become member of the No Hate Parliamentary Alliance, but also to speak back home in your countries with your parties, whether you might also be ready to sign this charter. I think that there has to be done some interpretation work, because some have problems with one single line, and we will try to clarify what is meant in reality. And so I'm really happy that it was such a strong sign today, and I'm sure that it was also a step forward to a world where racism and intolerance has no space anymore, but we will have many more people who deserve the Victis Prize for the empowerment of women. That's the future we are working for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petra. I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in an official report. I remind colleagues that the texts are to be submitted in typescript electronically, if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. Mr. Boulay is entitled to reply, but you already got 4 minutes in the beginning more, so let's have a deal. You have 2 minutes to reply. Julian.
Thank you, President. You are very generous. Given the amount of interventions on the election on Turkey, I would actually think that it would be more fair that Frank will have the final word, but it's not up to me to decide that. That being said, I really call upon the Azerbaijani and Armenian friends to use this possibility of the urgent debate as an honest way to have a dialogue and one oriented towards solutions. So we wish you good luck with that, dear friends. More than this, I would also like to draw your attention to the fact that several members of the Assembly have been recently prevented from participating in Assembly's activities, including committee meetings. And I remind you all that our parliaments have the obligation to make participation possible. And this obligation also concerns our colleagues who are substitutes. Of course, we think of all the political prisoners who today are beyond the bars in both Belarus and Russia, and they fought for the values that this Assembly stands for, and we call for an immediate release to all of those. And on a final note, I address a speech of thankfulness for the presentation of Madam Secretary General today in this Bureau's meeting on the announcement that next week the talks on the establishment of the registry of damage on Ukraine would be started as a dialogue between the Dutch side and the representatives of the Council of Europe. So congratulations on that. Thank you for allowing me to have this presentation, and I wish all of us a fantastic week with great debates and great results. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And although the rules do not foresee it, as your remark was correct, that there were a lot of remarks made with regard to the Turkish elections. Mr. Schwabe, could you say some words at the end of this debate?
That's very, very nice, Mr. President, but it's not necessary. I think everything was said already. At the end, we don't have to look into the regional situation, although there was some recommendation. For sure, we see the regional situation of Turkey and some other countries as well is difficult, and we really referred to the earthquake situation, and there were a lot of challenges in the country. We can speak about the refugee situation, but this is not our job here. Our job here is to monitor elections. And I would like to remind you again, we said that the will of the people we could see at the end in the result of the elections. I think this is very clear that we say it, and at the same time, it's nothing new. It's something we have in our monitoring reports, in the reports from the Venice Commission and the judgments of the court, that Turkey is not in a situation that we can happy with the democratic situation there. And for sure, to fulfill all the necessities for democratic elections, Turkey has to do much more. And I referred to the long report, if I cannot read it out here, so you can read it. It's sometimes quite interesting, and I think we can really learn a lot, not just for Turkey, but for ourselves as well, what we should do, looking into the observation of election missions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schwabe. That concludes the debate. The Bureau has proposed references to committees for ratification by the Assembly. They are set out in document 15791 and addendum 2. Is there any objection to the proposed references to committees? I don't see any, so the references are approved. I now propose that the other decisions in the progress report be ratified. Are there any objections? Do not see any, so they are approved. And that brings us to the next item of our agenda. That is the questions to our Secretary General, Madam Maria Pejcinovic-Buric, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. I would remind the Assembly that questions must be limited to 30 seconds. Colleagues should ask questions and not making speeches. Before giving the floor, first to the 5 colleagues from behalf of political groups, I want to congratulate our Secretary General with the result of the summit in Reykjavik. You spent a lot of efforts to get it there, Maria, and the result, the Reykjavik Declaration, is a result, I think, that satisfies both you as the Secretary General, the Committee of Ministers, and our Assembly, which is quite unique. Shall we now go to the questions on behalf of the political groups? First, I call Mr. Frank Schwabe on behalf of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats. 30 seconds, Frank.
So now I collect all the seconds. But thank you very much, Mr. President, Madam Secretary General. I have to ask you something about Turkey. You can imagine what it is. So we have the elections now, and as I said before, whoever is the president now, the former president is the president now again, but there is still the fulfillment of judgment of the European Court of Human Rights. And there is one judgment where we start a procedure under Article 46.4 already. What are the plans of the Committee of Ministers? What are your plans how to proceed with this procedure?
Thank you, Mr. Schwabe. Madam Secretary General.
Thank you very much for this question, and of course it is continuation in a way of the debate you had so far. Let me start with a generic response that the execution of the court judgments and final court judgments are not a plea to the respondent state. It's the obligation under the European Convention on Human Rights. So I can only say that for development so far, the last one concerning the decision of Regional Court of Appeal in the end of this December that upheld the decision, earlier decision of Istanbul Court sentencing Mr. Kavala to life imprisonment, is disregarding ECHR judgment. And of course, the fact that the decision was appealed still gives some room to find a implementation in a good faith of the ECHR and the Grand Chamber judgments. As you well know, and you mentioned it, it's only the second time that Article 46.4 is triggered, and in this particular case it's in a special way because in the previous such case there was the judgments was already underway of execution. In this case we are not there. And the Committee of Ministers at its regular meetings, every regular deputy meetings, considers this issue as a regular item on the agenda, so it's given utmost importance. There are a number of things that I will not, each one of them, enumerate here, but it included also the distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly going to meet Mr. Kavala, and on different levels we send the message that this has to be executed, but so far we are not there. And the last review at the Committee of Ministers DH format was held this month. And the interim resolution asks for Committee of Ministers and the Secretariat to prepare the next possible steps that we may take. So at this stage, the Secretariat is tasked to come by July with proposals, and then the committee will again review the case if nothing changes in next session. I can only call for immediate release of Mr. Kavala because that was what the ECHR was, the court was asking, and I can only deeply deplore that Mr. Kavala is still in prison and that we, for this moment, see not yet the result. But we know that this procedure has a very clear way how it will proceed unless the judgment is executed. We will certainly have to take much more important measures, and it may also concern Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. Next question comes from Mr. Emanuel Singers from Lithuania on behalf of the EPP Group. 30 seconds, Emanuel.
Yes, Madam Secretary, it was huge support of our meeting in summit in Reykjavik. A new initiative, we put at register, it was finally adopted like a step to special tribunal. My question will be short, and I have two questions, very short. First question is related how you will see in the future step forwards from register to special tribunal, while you will go to see the concrete project of register in The Hague, and thank you for that, and how we will go forward with initiating in the world special tribunal, of course, should be done in United Nations. Second question related to, related to the workers who are working here and staff, to the Russia, former Russia staff, please. Thank you.
Madam Secretary General, everybody has 30 seconds.
First, start with the register, and thank you for everyone. Indeed, we did propose the register, but I think it's really many people to thank for that we came with the decision, and the next week meeting of the parties will certainly continue to have this work. Now, how the register is linked with the special tribunal on the crime of aggression, the exact link is the accountability. So both are within the accountability of the Russian Federation for the war of aggression and all its consequences. So I see it as complementary, because I think what is aimed with the possible establishment of the special tribunal on the crime of aggression is to fill the gap of which at this moment is difficult to see who should and how it should be dealt with a crime of aggression that is, as it has been often said, mother of crimes for many other crimes that have been committed and continue to be committed in Ukraine. But other than that, there are two separate lines, I would say, of action on accountability. The register actually is first necessarily an urgent step that we had to take in order to have the possibility for civilian damages to be recorded. So in order not to be lost if the process would take too long in establishment the register under the treaty. So the way how we establish it with this enlarged partial agreement was a good way to counter, also to gain time in respect to that. But the register makes sense only within a larger compensation mechanism that needs to be decided by the international community. And indeed, we did this first step as forerunners, and we stand ready to play our part in working on two other steps, the next being comprehensive mechanism for this, which is compensation commission and compensation fund. So we are ready to be part of that, but certainly it has to be decided in a much larger conference of willing, if you wish so. For the special tribunal, as we often said, we also remain ready to be part of that. It has been discussed in this in the Parliamentary Assembly. It has been discussed by the Committee of Ministers. It indeed needs a bigger chapeau. It needs UN, hopefully UN heading, and I hope that all the efforts that are invested into that by different parties, starting with Ukraine, but also with some others, will end up by having such a conference of people who would like to set up the special tribunal on the war of aggression. But these are two separate things. Now for the consequences of the Russian Federation expulsion from the Council of Europe. Again, could be very long, but let me remain very pointed. So when we dealt with that in March 2022, there were legal and financial and institutional consequences. So within that, of course, it was the consequences that the staff working at the Council of Europe, who have according to the rule, only Russian Federation nationality should leave the organization because they don't comply with the requirement, which is to be nationals of member state of the Council of Europe. However, our current regulation, which is in place, provides that this requirement is looked at the employment and not later than that. So starting with that and having a comprehensive approach for legal, financial and other possible consequences for the Council of Europe, under the statute, it's the duty of the Secretary General to propose. I propose the approach that is known to you, so that all those who have only Russian Federation nationality leave immediately. For those who had very short-term or different kind of employment with the Council of Europe, that could have been stopped immediately. For those who have fixed-term contract, there are few only remaining that work still, and by the end of this year they will all leave, because if they reapply for the post, they would not be eligible for the post. For the many of those who still work with us, they are double nationals, and in that sense, they comply with the requirement of being nationals of the member states.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. Next question comes from Madam Yevgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine on behalf of the ALDE Group. Yevgenia, 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. Madam Secretary General, my question will be very practical and precise. When do you foresee when first Ukrainian citizen can file an application to The Hague for this register of damages? And as you mentioned, it is the first step. We need to make sure that these claims will be paid sometime, better sooner than later. So what would be practical steps on the establishing this comprehensive mechanism, especially with using the Russian assets? Thanks.
Thank you, Yevgenia. Madam Secretary General.
Well, I hope that this moment will be soon there, and we are really working very much on that the register becomes operational very soon. It may take 2 to 3 months. But I hope that not only in The Hague Ukrainians will be able to deposit the claim, but also we aim also for an antenna office of the register in Kyiv. So hopefully people could choose which is the better place that they can come or that they can deposit their claim. Now, where we are with the activities, we are having, as I think it was mentioned, I summoned the first meeting of the parties next week. You know that we count 42 parties at this moment, member states and the European Union included, that among them they are all G7 member states, that they are also all our observer states who could be eligible for that. So I'm very happy that we also wait for a few more announced parties to the register. And of course, I would like to appeal, because this is what I'm going to do at my next meetings, one starting with in 2-3 days conference on recovery of Ukraine in London and later in New York, is to ask for more parties to the register, because the number we have is really very good. But I believe that because we want to have accountability embraced by as many people as possible, all those who are defending the free world. So we, I think, should not stop searching for more member states to join the register. Now, where we, what are the next steps at this meeting of the parties is the appointment of the director of because if we want to move on budget and on other things, the director need to be there, and some other rules of procedure that need to be decided by the state parties. So this will be done next week, 27th of June. Then probably another meeting will be summoned, all depend how quickly we will be able to work all together before summer break. And the very important landmark event is on 11th of September in Riga, Latvia, where we will have an informal meeting of ministers of justice, and as ensuring after that another meeting of the parties to the register. So we hope that by this meeting, and I'm sure that Latvian presidency as well is aiming at that somewhere at this point in time we would be able to say that the register is open for applications. But I hope that we will be soon with the speed that we were working before and that we are working now, that we will rather soon have the register open for people to deposit the claims.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. Last question on behalf of political groups comes from Madam Laura Castel from Spain on behalf of the Unified European Left. Laura, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Madam Secretary General, it is urgent to ensure respect for human rights convention. I am talking, of course, about the cases of Demirtas and Kavala, or even Julian Assange. But there are more cases such as Dani Gallardo, sentenced to 4 years in prison for demonstrating in favor of Catalan political prisoners. 4 years in prison. This is why our group is wondering whether the Council of Europe will push for ending the political persecution inside the organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Madam Secretary General.
Well, in the case you mentioned, of course, we are following developments after the Supreme Court decided to examine the appeals filed against the government-granted pardons to the jailed Catalan pro-independent leaders. And since there is the appeal, I can only reiterate call to all sides to show restraint and not escalate political tensions during the examination of judiciary. And in that respect, I really trust in the independence of the judiciary in Spain. And needless to say, we continue to follow the matter very closely. But of course, I cannot comment the decisions of any court, including the decision of the Supreme Court. But in more general, I'm aware of the resumption of the dialogue on Catalonia, and I can only encourage all parties to remain committed to the process which can be of benefit to all. So I think nothing can replace the dialogue in a good faith. So I hope this will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. We now take 3 questions together as we are running out of time. First question comes from Mr. Nigar Arpardaray from Azerbaijan. 30 seconds, Nigar.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary General. Thank you for your time. Bearing in mind the interest by the Council of Europe in the processes in South Caucasus in normalization of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, I would like to ask if there's any plans by Council of Europe on restoration of transport links between Nakhchivan region of Azerbaijan and the rest of Azerbaijan. May I remind that Nakhchivan is a home to 500,000 people, and it was isolated by Armenia for 30 years, and all the existing infrastructure on the territory of Armenia was destroyed by Armenian side. This issue was stipulated in the trilateral statement, but unfortunately this urgent matter didn't find any address by Armenian side. So my question is if there's any plans by Council of Europe, and what can you do in this situation? Thank you.
Next, thank you, Nika. Next question comes from Madam Lipsime Grigorian from Armenia. You also have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Madam Secretary General, one of the key deliveries of the Reykjavik summit is recommitting to the convention system and to the court. While a number of countries fail to implement the decisions of the courts, by this undermining the credibility of the convention system. Among them is the decision of the court interim measure on Lachin corridor blockade. So my question is, what concrete steps are you going to take to ensure the rights of the people and their security living in conflict areas, including Nagorno-Karabakh, and to ensure that the decisions of the court are implemented? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I have to say very much sorry to Madam Eka Sepashvili from Georgia, because I forgot her on the list on behalf of the speakers. Ika is going to ask her question on behalf of the European Conservative Group. You have the floor. Sorry.
Never mind. Thank you. We highly welcome Reykjavik Summit declaration, especially considering Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, ongoing occupation of Georgian territories, and other conflicts. In this regard, summit succeeded having most of heads in place during this summit. Now the organization experienced shortage of financing and wide fundraising processes underway. In this regard, we are interested in which kind of activities and which fields will be financed in case of attracting this additional amount of money. Is the organization going to spend more attention and more funds to the public awareness-raising activities?
Thank you, Eka. And again, so sorry. Madam Secretary General, could you answer these 3 questions?
Thank you very much, and thank you for mentioning again the summit. Indeed, I think that was the showcase how when we have a substantial event with the largest ever gathering of our leaders in the history of the Council of Europe. We also had the largest ever coverage throughout with more than 1,000 articles on the summit itself. So it is clear that more information we can provide and more attractive work we can have, that there is a coverage. So, but coming back to the issues that were decided at the summit, it was clear that the summit was a success. It was clear that the leaders gathered because there was an urgent need to address some issues. Front and center the issue how to continue assisting Ukraine, but also how to counter backsliding in democracy, how to give more prominence for the work of the court and the convention system, how to address new or evolving challenges. So with the ambition that is certainly there in the declaration, it was clear that proposing the budget, which is my duty as the Secretary General, I had to address priorities that were tabled at the summit, and I also had to propose the budget, which is the increase in real terms. So this increase is in the framework document that I just presented to the deputies, is actually mirroring the declaration and the priorities. It is, the structure is changed as comparing to what the structure of such a document would be without this document. So certainly the amount that concerns and that I pledged for in this framework document is aimed at first to address the priorities which were flagged by our leaders. Now for generally public awareness campaign, I think we have recently started with several things, including more presence of the Council of Europe in respective member states, and I can only repeat here, I know that quite a number of delegations are doing so back home and in the parliaments, but also with the wider public, raising awareness of what we do here and what is important there for the citizens of each all us together of 46 member states, but also for each particular member state. So certainly the awareness raising is an important part, especially in the era, digital era where we live, where people really want to see information in real time, and information that they can easily, if I can say, absorb. So in that respect, Deputy Secretary General is working on a visibility project in our member states. Now for the issue of how to bring peace in the area of Caucasus in our two countries. I can but just say that what Council of Europe proposed as one of the measures that would be important and completely fall within the competence of the organization is confidence-building measures. And I can inform you that 3 rounds of these confidence-building measures have been concluded, and that we believe that continuing in this way would be, I would say, Council of Europe way of dealing with issues, restoring the dialogue and most particularly the trust between the parties. Now for how to restore the peace from different angles, the road to Nakhchivan, or the peace in Nagorno-Karabakh, and something that pertains to human rights, which is restoration of right to free passage through the Lachin corridor. I can tell you that what I, from my side, ask is a high-level secretariat delegation that agreed with both parties to go to each one. The one in Azerbaijan already took place 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and the one for Armenia is agreed in 2 weeks' time. And the purpose of that is really to review all the pertinent issues linked with Council of Europe and the particular countries, but also in this respect linked with how to find a way to have more dialogue and restore peace within Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I think that the work that is been done recently, and someone already referred to that, is very important, and I could only encourage that more dialogue, more listening to each other, and more working together on open issues, and these delegations that go to both countries are also there in order to ask each particular side to address the issues that are open, like, you know, POWs, the missing persons, the mine maps, and all the respective other issues that are at stake. So I believe that, again, nothing can replace this working together on the peace, and certainly we can assist, but the main and important part relies on the leaders of the two countries. And I can see that the meetings are taking place, but still also the problems are there, so they are not solved. But the problem is also not from yesterday. And to finish, you remember that when both countries acceded back in history to the Council of Europe, both undertook the obligation to find a peaceful solution to the important issues which are at stake. And I can only recall that because it remains pertinent more than ever, and in particular when we have war in fully fledged aggression on Ukraine, we certainly need to have more resolution of conflicts rather than new one erasing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Maria. Madam Secretary General, I now have to interrupt the list of questions to you. May I thank you again for your fruitful dialogue with our Assembly, and we are looking forward to see you next time in this hemicycle. Thank you very much. We now will hear the address by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary, Mr. Péter Szijjártó. After his address, Mr. Minister will take questions from the floor. Mr. Minister, may I say welcome back, as you are an habitué of addressing our Parliamentary Assembly. We especially recall your time as the Chair of the Committee of Ministers during the Hungarian presidency of the Committee of Ministers. That was 2 years ago, from May to November 2021, and you intervened in both in our June and September sessions for an exchange of views about your presidency then. The context is, of course, very different on several aspects since 2021, as we all know. And we are eager to hear your views on the current challenges facing Europe in the context of the ongoing war of aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine and the implementation of the Fourth Summit decisions. Mr. Minister, without further delay, could I invite you to take the floor?
Thank you very much. Okay, perfect, thank you. Dear Mr. Speaker, Madam Secretary General, dear colleagues, first of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to you, Mr. Speaker, and to all of the colleagues to allow me to address the plenary session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I have asked for this opportunity for 2 reasons. First, that I myself have been a member of the Hungarian Parliament for the 22nd year now, so therefore I pay a great respect towards all our fellow parliamentarians. And I know very well that how important a democratic legitimacy is behind the governmental policies, which legitimacy is being ensured by a stable support by the Parliament. And second reason why I have asked for this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, was that I do believe, still do believe, in the importance of dialogue and discussion, especially in times when we have to be confronted with so many challenges, as you were kind enough to refer to. And currently, the Council of Europe is the widest platform in Europe, offering a chance to discuss the most pressing issues ahead our beloved continent. And I have asked for this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, even if I knew, even if I know that what I'm going to say here will not fall in line with the opinion of the majority of the colleagues in this hemicycle. And I know that many of you will absolutely not like what I would say now. But I do believe that democracy is about confronting our opinions, even if that opinion belongs to the majority or to the minority. And of course, I will not take too much of your time because, as once again, someone who spent more than 21 years in the Parliament, I would love to spare more time for questions and to address those issues which are of your concern. But as an introduction, may I say that we are 78 years after the conclusion of the Second World War, and there is a war again taking place in our continent, which is a regional war with global impacts. And I do believe that the most pressing question today is whether this war will remain a regional war or it is going to become a global war. Currently, the impacts are global, and the question is whether the war will become global. 78 years after the conclusion of the Second World War, I do believe it's not an exaggeration to say that our continent is being faced with the most serious economic and security-related challenges. Our firm opinion is that the European people are not responsible for the war in Ukraine. And we are also firm, it's our firm belief, that the European people are not being involved in this war. Some of the political leaders definitely are in a state of war psyche. That's not a question. But I still do believe that this war in Europe is not the war of the people. This war in Ukraine is not the war of the people of Europe. But all citizens, all people in Europe do pay the price of this war in the form of skyrocketing energy prices, the skyrocketing inflation, prices of commodities, food, and so on and so forth. The war has launched a year and 4 months ago. And during this 1 year and 4 months, Europe was not able to push this war towards the end. We were not successful in reaching peace throughout these 16 months. The risk of escalation is more serious than ever. And unfortunately, our competitiveness when it comes to the European economy is worse than ever. What else could we say, putting into consideration that we have to pay 7 times more for the gas than it has to be paid in the United States, or 3 times more for electricity, what has to be paid in China, for example. We do believe, Mr. Speaker and dear colleagues, and here I'm pretty sure we will have a tough debate at the end of the introduction, but we do believe that Europe has committed 2 major mistakes in this regard. First, that we have been going deeper and deeper into the policy of sanctions. And second, that we have kind of accepted or have not turned down the invitation of the United States into a competition, the name of which is Who Helps More Ukraine, militarily speaking. And enter into a competition with the #1 military superpower of the world regarding military support. That was a very illogical step, not to leave it out of consideration that since the war has been taking place in Europe, we Europeans have to be faced with the most serious impacts of it. And unfortunately, we are getting deeper and deeper into a very dangerous spiral, because the more weapons are being delivered to Ukraine, the longer this war will take. And the longer this war takes, the more people will die. And we do believe that the most important duty of the international community currently should be to save lives of the people. And saving lives of the people is not possible with war. Saving lives of the people is only possible with peace. On sanctions, I was there by discussing the issues of all the 10 packages so far. I was there when the first package was discussed. And I do remember very clearly the 2 goals which were attached to the sanctions. First, that because of the sanctions, Russia will go on its knees when it comes to economy. So, second goal, they will have to stop the war. We are 16 months after, 10 packages of sanctions introduced, and we do not see any of these 2 goals coming closer. Russia is definitely not on its knees when it comes to economy, and the war is getting more and more brutal. And if you look at what the United States have done, economically speaking, they have introduced IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which is a regulation which openly gives priority to US companies countering the European companies. And here, with the sanctions, the European companies are being confronted with more and more economic challenges and hurdles. And if you put these 2 next to each other, it becomes obvious that because of the difference of the approach of the economic reactions given to the war on both sides of the ocean, the competitiveness of the European companies, thus the competitiveness of the European economy, is declining very badly. And dear colleagues, we Hungarians are in a very, very special situation here. We are a neighboring country to Ukraine. So therefore, the risk of escalation is the most serious on us, neighbors. Because if a war is being escalated, it's not being escalated thousands of kilometers away, but in the direct neighborhood for the first time. And second, I'm standing here representing a nation, dear colleagues, a nation, members of which are dying in this war. Given the fact that there is a significant Hungarian community living in Ukraine, 150,000. And since they are Ukrainian citizens, they are being mobilized to the Ukrainian army. And most of them are being deployed on the front line. And unfortunately, a lot of them are dying. And we don't want any more Hungarian people. We don't want any more people to die in this war. Therefore, once again, I would like to underline that the most important duty of the international community nowadays should be to save lives of the people. But we see another very serious impact of this war coming, Mr. Speaker and dear colleagues. And this impact is that the world is going to be divided into blocks again. And if the world is being divided into blocks again, that's the worst possible news we can be confronted with. And we Hungarians who are located in Central Europe, we know how it feels when there's a conflict between East and West. Whenever there was a conflict between East and West throughout our history, we turned out to be losers always. So whenever there's a civilized cooperation a civilized division of labor, a civilized way of working together between East and West, it's always much better news for us than a conflict between the two. Instead of the world being divided into blocks, we would prefer connectivity in the future. Connectivity being based on mutual respect and targeting mutual benefits. And unfortunately, there are some impacts which are strengthening and are about to accelerate this phenomenon of the world being divided into blocks, namely the efforts of some European friends of ours to decouple the European economy from the Eastern economies. And please do remember that for long decades, a very firm basis for the European economic growth was a good combination, a good cooperation between the highly developed Western technologies and the cheap, relatively easy, accessible natural resources from the East. And these two, technologies from the West, natural resources from the East, have been combined for the sake of a quickly growing European economy. Now that's over. Everybody knows it's over. But if we decouple the European economy from the Chinese, now that's going to be a knockout for the European economy. Why? Because you cannot decouple two economies which have a trade volume of 865 billion euros in a year. Not to speak about the fact, dear colleagues, that based on political decisions, the backbone of the European economy and the backbone of the European competitiveness, namely the automotive industry, has to become a totally new industry by going through a revolutionary set of changes. And when the strategy of creating the electromobility in Europe was fought over, those who were thinking about this issue thought about how Western companies will be able to build fantastic electric cars in the future, but no one thought about who will provide the batteries for them. And this is the first time ever when in a major European industry, which determines the achievement of the entire European economy for many, many years or decades, our European companies are totally dependent on Eastern supplies, whether we like it, whether we dislike it, whether we are brave enough to speak about whether we are not. But this is a situation which has been created by political decisions here in Europe. But, dear colleagues, we look at the Europe-China cooperation, and we look at the East to West division of labor as a chance, as an opportunity, and not as a threat or not as a risk. And we in Hungary have proved that if we become a meeting point for Eastern and Western investors, we can take a lot of benefit out of it for our people. Therefore, I think it would be great if, instead of decoupling, here in Europe, we could start a debate about how to build connectivity further and how we Europeans take advantage out of an East to West cooperation and sharing labor in the future. And Mr. Speaker and dear colleagues, I'd like to raise an issue when it comes to the possible long-term negative impacts of the war in Ukraine, an issue which has been raised now more and more often by our African colleagues, some of them, who ask the question, what will happen? What will happen to those weapons which are being delivered to Ukraine? What will happen to them? Is there any guarantee that these weapons will not appear in certain regions of the world which are fragile and where just part of these weapons could cause tremendous tragedies? This is not my question. This is a question of representatives of those regions and countries which are fragile and which can be destabilized very easily. And we all know that in these fragile regions, regional conflicts can occur very easily, and if they do occur, then extremism, threat of terror, and additional flows of illegal migration is going to be launched. So, dear colleagues, Mr. Speaker, here in Europe I understand that we Hungarians do belong to a minority when it comes to our position regarding the war and regarding how the war should be resolved and how we should reach peace as soon as possible. But please do believe me that the world is more and bigger than just Europe and than just the transatlantic area. And when it comes to the world, vast majority of the countries are absolutely interested in peace to come as soon as possible. And we Hungarians do believe to this big global majority which wants peace as soon as possible once again. And we Hungarians have been under constant attack and pressure, obviously, because of representing this position of ours. But I have to tell you that, like in all cases, we Hungarians will always represent a Hungarian position in this regard. We cannot look at these issues through the angle of anyone else, just our own one. So therefore, we will always represent the Hungarian national interest, which is to create peace as soon as possible in our neighborhood. And this is not only the position of the government in Hungary. I'd like to underline this at the end of my introduction, Mr. Speaker. This is not only the position of the Hungarian government. This is the will of the people in Hungary. We had elections just a bit than a month after the war had broken out. And there were two very clear alternatives offered by the ruling party and the opposition. We, the ruling party, made it very clear that if we are elected, we will do our best in order to keep Hungary out of the war, in order to maintain our safety and security, and contribute to all efforts to create peace, and that we would definitely not take part in delivering weapons to this war. The opposition has represented the, let's say, European mainstream position. And the outcome of the election was very clear. Landslide victory for the ruling party, more MPs than ever, bigger majority than ever, more votes and more support than ever. More than 2/3 of the seats in the parliament are being occupied by the government parties as an outcome of the election just right after the outbreak of the war. Therefore, we consider it as our obligation, as our duty, to stand up for our national interest. And that's why, regardless of all pressure and all attacks, and knowing that this is now not a majority position in Europe, we will stand up for peace in our neighborhood, and we will stand up for the necessity of saving lives of the people. Mr. Speaker, I really do appreciate the opportunity that I could address the plenary, and I am more than honored to take the questions of fellow parliamentarians. And once again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your address to this Assembly, in the awareness that not everything that you say would immediately be supported by the whole Assembly as a whole. And as a parliamentarian, you are prepared. Now you have shown your preparedness to take questions from our parliamentarians. We first take the 5 speakers of the political groups, and the first question comes from Madam Ata Bilali Zendeli from North Macedonia, and she speaks on behalf of the group of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats. Arta, you have the floor. Your microphone.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear Minister of Hungary, there is no doubt that upon accession into the Council of Europe, the Republic of Hungary has accepted the values and the principles of the organization. But recently, some very important observers and bodies have stated that there are some lacks of rule of law and democracy in Hungary, unfortunately. I would like to know what is your government doing in order to address the issues related to judiciary independence, the restrictions on civil society organizations, as well as restrictions on the freedom of the media. Thank you.
Mr. Minister.
Dear colleague, thank you so much for your question. This is an ongoing debate for the last 13 years, for the time we have been in government. And I have to tell you that, that these are perceptions. These are perceptions which have nothing to do with reality. I can proudly tell you that Hungary is a democracy where the freedom of media, freedom of speech, freedom of judiciary is being absolutely guaranteed for every individual and for every community in the country. We are proud of that. The reason why we have this debate for such a long time is that the mainstream in Europe cannot digest that for the last 13 years, a government has won 4 continuous elections with a 2/3 majority, which represents a right-wing, patriotic, Christian democratic, conservative approach, anti-mainstream approach, if you like, and is being successful. And I think as long as we are there in office and as long as we are successful, these attacks and these accusations will be out there. But once again, I'd like to assure you that we in Hungary are absolutely committed to those values which this organization is so proud of.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Next question comes from Madam Andrea Eder-Gitschaler from Austria, and she speaks on behalf of the European People's Party. Andrea.
Danke, Herr Präsident, sehr geehrter Herr Minister. Ich wollte Sie eigentlich zu der Freilassung der Schlepper in Ungarn fragen. Jetzt aufgrund Ihrer Rede muss ich schon Sie fragen, wie Sie zu der Solidarität in Europa stehen, zu den Werten des Europaparlaments und zu Europa. Ich bin schon etwas schockiert von Ihren Ausführungen. Wir alle wollen den Frieden in Europa und wir alle unterstützen die Ukraine in ihrem Kampf. Aber was Sie gesagt haben, dass Sie nicht sicher sind, wo die Waffen hinkommen, das hat mich schon ein wenig schockiert. Wie kommen Sie zu dieser Aussage?
Mr. Minister.
Dear colleague, thank you very much for your question. I understand we both are representing countries which are not delivering weapons to Ukraine. I hope I understand it clear. Your Minister of Defense had a very fruitful and constructive meeting with our Minister of Defense, where both of them have made it very clear that our 2 countries have not been delivering weapons to Ukraine and will not deliver weapons to Ukraine. On migration and on the traffickers or the smugglers, I have to tell you that we feel that we are being left alone a bit. We are located at the external border of the European Union. It is our duty to protect that border. It is our duty to protect the European Union as well. It is our duty to keep the migrants out. Last year, we have kept 265,000 migrants out of Hungary and out of the European Union. I regret to say, but it would be much better if your border guards helped us to protect the external border of the European Union than lining up on the Hungarian-Austrian border. We Hungarians have spent around 2 billion euros so far on protecting the border, including the costs stimulated by the traffickers kept in jail in Hungary. We have received 1% of this sum of money from Brussels. So when we speak about solidarity, I'd like to ask you to put this into consideration as well. Keeping the migrants out of Europe, contributing to the security of Europe is a very clear sign of solidarity, which we will perform in the future proudly as well.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Prochaine question vient de M. Damien Cotier de la Suisse au nom du groupe ADLE. Damien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons déjà eu l'occasion d'avoir des dialogues et de discuter de nos désaccords. Alors, merci d'être présent pour discuter de ces désaccords, mais ils sont profonds. À l'époque, nous parlions de la situation des communautés LGBT dans votre pays qui sont sous pression. Aujourd'hui, le désaccord, il porte sur ce que veut dire la paix, parce que vous avez beaucoup parlé d'intérêt, mais peu de valeurs. Cette organisation, elle porte des valeurs, mais elle porte aussi les intérêts de l'Europe, parce qu'il n'est pas dans l'intérêt de l'Europe de laisser un pays, la Fédération de Russie, envahir un autre pays. Elle l'avait déjà fait partiellement d'ailleurs en Géorgie, puis en Crimée, puis maintenant sur l'ensemble du territoire de l'Ukraine, parce que cela va déstabiliser notre continent. Alors, au lieu de parler uniquement des intérêts et d'appel à la paix, est-ce que vous ne feriez pas mieux, Monsieur le ministre, d'utiliser votre influence auprès de Moscou pour éviter que ce pays ne viole tous les jours le droit international par une guerre d'agression qui est illégale et ne commette des violations pratiquement quotidiennes des conventions de Genève?
Merci Damien. Monsieur le ministre.
Dear colleague, thank you so much for your question. First of all, I'd like to make it clear that I think that there's no difference between us when it comes to the question, what do we think about the war? Because this war must be condemned, as we have condemned it from the very beginning, and as we keep saying this. The question is how quickly this war can or should come to its end, and how we can save the lives of as many people as we just can. Therefore, I'd like to tell you that I still do believe that it is important to keep the channels of communication open. Because if we do not keep the channels of communication open, for me, it would mean that we give up the hope for peace, and this is something that we would not like to do. When it comes to our interactions with our Russian counterparts, we always make it very clear that this war is bad to us. This war has very negative and bad impacts on Hungary, and this war has put a lot of challenges ahead of us as well. Therefore, it would be our interest as well that this war comes to its end as soon as possible. So I think we have no difference in what we think about the war itself, but we definitely do have a difference how we see to come to the end of the war as quickly as it is just possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. La prochaine orateur est Monsieur Thibault François de la France au nom du groupe des conservateurs européens. Thibault.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Ministre, chers collègues. Le pacte européen sur la migration et l'asile, présenté par la Commission de Bruxelles, a pour ambition annoncée de remédier aux failles de la politique d'asile européen en organisant, je cite, la gestion de l'asile. In fine, ce pacte aura pour seule conséquence que d'organiser la récupération sans condition de clandestins en mer Méditerranée et de dispatcher ces clandestins de manière autoritaire dans tous les pays de l'État membre de l'Union européenne. Cela faisant donc une part belle aux passeurs et trafiquants d'êtres humains, et cela transforme l'agence Frontex en une simple hôtesse d'accueil de migrants. Monsieur le ministre, pouvez-vous préciser la position de la Hongrie sur ce funeste pacte migratoire, ainsi que sur les enjeux qu'il représente pour les autres pays européens? Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Thibault. Mr. Minister.
Well, dear colleague, thank you so much for your question. I think it's an extremely important issue now and one of the major challenges ahead of us in Europe. Your question gives me a chance to make it very clear that we make a clear distinction between refugees and migrants. Because we in Hungary are located in the neighborhood of Ukraine, in the neighborhood of the war. So far, we have accepted more than 1 million, I want to underline, more than 1 million refugees from Ukraine. We have allowed everybody to come in. Currently, there are 1,300 schools and kindergartens in Hungary which are enrolling refugee kids and refugee students. We encourage the employers to employ the refugees who come to us. We ensure them equal access to healthcare and education as well. So when it comes to refugees, it's a totally different issue compared to when it comes to migrants. And here I think the major distinction comes from international law. And I do hope that international law is, there's an agreement among all of us that international law has to be respected in this regard as well. Because international law says that if someone is being forced to leave his or her home because of war or any other events, then he or she is entitled to stay temporarily on the territory of the first safe country, as long as the reasons why he or she had to leave his home are there. But international law does not say that anyone would be allowed to pick a country where he or she would like to live in and get there by violating borders of a series of countries. First safe country. This is a phenomenon that should be respected. We in Hungary are protecting the external border of the European Union. Our neighbor is Serbia. The neighbor of Serbia is North Macedonia. Then Bulgaria, Turkiye, and the others. These are all peaceful countries. No one has the right, I want to underline, no one has the right, irrespectively from any other circumstances, to violate the borders between these countries. Because these are peaceful countries. And no one is allowed, no one is entitled to violate the border between two peaceful countries, because that's a violation of a sovereignty of those countries. Therefore, we Hungarians will always stick to our right to make a sovereign decision whom we allow to enter the territory of our country and whom not, and with whom we are ready to live together and with whom not. And we cannot let this sovereign right of ours to be transferred either to Brussels or to Berlin or to Paris or to Washington or whenever. This is a sovereign decision, must be a sovereign decision of a sovereign country, and this must be the case in the future as well.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And the last question on behalf of the political groups comes from Mr. George Katrougalis from Greece on behalf of the Unified European Left. George, 30 seconds.
Dear colleague, if I understood you well, you believe that the war in Ukraine could end by some kind of a diplomatic plan. I would like to ask you if your country is ready to propose such a plan, which are going to be the main points of it, especially in comparison with plans that we already know, the Draghi plan, the Chinese proposal, the Brazilian proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Mr. Minister.
My dear colleague, it's good to see you again. And thank you for your question here. You're right. I mean, I hope we agree. And I hope I'm right. You think that this war does not have a solution at the battleground. This war only has a solution around the negotiating table. Now, I'm not representing a world power which would be entitled to put forward the peace plans. But one thing we can definitely do, and I have done it already. Couple of days after the launch of the war, I have called Minister Lavrov, and I have called the head of the presidential administration in Kiev, Mr. Yermak, and I told both of them that we Hungarians are always at their disposal, both. Hungary is ready to provide both sides with a platform, with a physical location of any kind of talks, ensuring level playing fields, safety, security, fairness. And I told them that I would not call them another time, because I think that this is such a serious issue that if you have a statement once, you have to stick to it. And we stick to it. So whenever the two sides need us, we are there. One thing for sure, we don't want more people to die. And the longer this war takes, the more people will die. And therefore, for us, it totally doesn't matter where the peace plan comes from. If the plan is about peace, I think it's worth to have a look at it, and it has a worth to discuss it. So therefore, I do hope that both sides will find the opportunity and will have the readiness to sit around the same table and discuss the issue how to come to peace, with respecting the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. We now are going to take three questions together, if you allow me. And after the three questions, you can answer them. The first question comes from Mr. Samet Seda from Azerbaijan. Samet?
Mr. Minister, glad to see you again here. We, together with Hungary, have very close relationships. And Azerbaijan very well known not only with our oil and gas project, but at the same time, just recently, in 2022, we have signed new renewable energy project with Georgia, Romania, and Hungary. What do you think, Mr. Minister, about the future of these energy projects? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samad. Next question comes from Madam Elvira Kovac from Serbia. Elvira.
Thank you, President, Mr. Minister. It's a pleasure to see you here. As a representative of Hungarian minority living in Serbia, I'm really witnessing the really good relations between Serbia and Hungary, and I think part of it is because Serbia is constructive in, Serbia understood in receiving our constructive proposals. Therefore, I would like to ask you about minority rights and how we can refrain different countries from withdrawing already achieved minority rights, and how can we ensure that the rights of national minorities can be exercised also collectively? So we should speak about collective political language educational rights and not only about individual rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvira. And the third question before you are entitled to answer, Mr. Minister, comes from Madam Ripsime Grigorian from Armenia. Ripsime, you have the floor. Thank you. And then we take a third question more from Mr. John Howe from the United Kingdom. John?
Thank you very much. Can you please tell me why your country voted against Kosovo becoming a member of this assembly, and what it would take for you to change your mind on that?
Mr. Minister, three quite interesting and not completely related questions. Up to you.
So I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that the answers will be not related to each other either. Dear colleagues, thank you so much for raising these important questions. First of all, on our colleague from Azerbaijan, Mr. Saidov, thank you very much for raising the issue of energy security in Europe. We are a landlocked country in the heart of Europe without any significant natural resources when it comes to oil and gas, at least. Therefore, we are dependent on imports. We are dependent on deliveries. And we hear day by day the demand from our European and American friends to diversify. We would be extremely happy to do so. Therefore, we have concluded very successful negotiations with Azerbaijan on starting the gas deliveries from Azerbaijan to Hungary. And we have a common political will that we build it up to a contract reaching 1 or 2 billion cubic meters annually. But why we cannot perform this contract now is the lack of infrastructure in the southeastern part of Europe. And everybody should understand that the issue of energy supply has nothing to do with politics and nothing to do with ideology and nothing to do with political taste. This is an issue of physical reality. And as long as gas can be delivered in pipeline and not in a backpack, the infrastructure determines the possibilities of the countries, given by geography. When we raise this issue in the European Union, asking for European funds to upgrade infrastructure in the southeastern part of Europe, to be able to add new sources to our national energy mix, the answer was that, well, the European Union is not very happy to spend on gas deliveries anymore because we need new renewables. Fine, in 25 years. So we know what's going to happen then. But the question is, what's going to happen until then? And when we are demanded day by day to diversify, and when we make it clear that the issue of buying energy from different sources is not a matter of political taste, and we ask for financial assistance to be able to add new sources and new delivery routes to our energy mix, then we get no support. So therefore, I do believe that the European Union has lost credibility in this regard. And I do hope that together with our Romanian, Bulgarian, Turkish, Serbian friends, together with Greece and Slovakia, we will be able to upgrade the regional energy infrastructure in a way that we can add alternative sources to our energy supply. So we will be happy to welcome the first deliveries this year from Azerbaijan. When it comes to the question of Mrs. Kovacs, thank you so much for raising this issue. Elvira, I'd like to tell you that we are proud to consider the rights of the national communities, national minorities, as collective rights, as rights of communities. And therefore, we are extremely grateful to the Serbian authorities, to the Serbian president, to the Serbian government, to provide the Hungarians in Serbia with the rights which you are provided with. Serbia should be a role model in this regard, my friends, my colleagues, a role model. And therefore, I'd like to ask you to take into consideration the recent opinion announced by the Venice Commission. And thank you, Titus, Minister Korlacian, for cooperating with us in this issue. If one had told me 8 years ago that we would cooperate on national minority issues with Romania, I would have laughed at it, but now this is the reality. So thank you for the cooperation. The Venice Commission made it very clear that the regulations which have been passed in Ukraine regarding the national minorities are absolutely not fitting with the international standards in this regard. And I do hope that this plenary and this institution will make its best in order to ensure that all member states here will respect the regulations, international regulations and standards regarding the rights of the national minorities. And our colleague from the United Kingdom raised the issue of our vote when it comes to the membership of Kosovo in this organization. I have to tell you that we Hungarians who are living in the neighborhood of the Western Balkans, we are super interested in peace and stability in that region. And we do know that one of the very important preconditions of this long-lasting peace and stability is the settlement of the debate between Belgrade and Pristina. And principally speaking, we support all initiatives which bring us closer to the resolution of this conflict, and we never support any initiatives about we think that it would not bring us closer. And I do believe that as long as this debate between Belgrade and Pristina is being resolved, the application on behalf of Kosovo to any international organizations is not helpful. I understand we have a debate on this issue. I respect your opinion, and I do hope that you will respect mine as well. So as soon as the debate between Belgrade and Pristina is being resolved, we are ready to come back to this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I now can allow the last 4 questions, and then you answer, and then we are running out of time. First question comes from Mr. Titus Korlacian from Romania. Titus.
Thank you, President. Mr. Minister, a topic related to national minorities as individual rights according to the European standards. Mr. Minister, I'm interested to raise the same question that I have raised you in September 2021, and I'm interested to find out if Hungary and the Hungarian government will adopt in the end, after all these years, the appropriate measures to assure a real representation of national minorities living in Hungary in the Hungarian parliament, starting, of course, with the ethnic Romanians, knowing the fact that the spokesperson system is not a real representation system in reality. It's something that is requested for more than 30 years by the ethnic Romanians living in Hungary, by the Romanian state as a kin state in our bilateral dialogue, represents a European standard, and after last year, a judgment of the European Court of Human Rights against Hungary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Titus. Next question comes from Mr. Yuri Kamalchuk from Ukraine. Yuri.
Thank you. I want to remind you, in 1956, more than 2,600 Hungarians were killed and almost 20,000 were wounded in Hungary in 3 days from Soviet Kremlin army. Maybe you expected the same scenario in Kyiv. Ukraine is a shield of protection of European democracy. Ukraine is a part of European values and always defended. Why Budapest has blocked the next tranche of funds from the European Peace Fund for military assistance to Ukraine? Why Hungary tried to block anti-Russian sanctions? How much Russian assets were blocked in Hungary, and when did you plan to transfer them to rebuild in Ukraine? Where is Hungarian reaction for ecocide against Ukraine in Kakhovka? Who initiates the war in Ukraine? Who is responsible for all deaths of Ukrainian civilians? And last one, 11 defenders of Ukraine who were held as prisoners of war by terrorist country Moscow are actually located on the territory of Hungary. How it happens actually, and when they will come back home to their families?
Thank you, Juri. Then I give the floor to Mr. Darko Kaevski from North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, the German Bundestag voted on a resolution that recognized the Macedonian language, identity and culture. This resolution encourages North Macedonia to continue with the next steps of the EU accession process. As stated, North Macedonia's path to the Union is supported by credible and tangible progress. Respected Minister, which forthcoming action Hungary will undertake to express its support clearly for North Macedonia? Thank you.
I do not see Andrei Hunko for the fourth question. I said we have four. So, la dernière orateur est Monsieur Bernard Fournier de la France. Bernard.
Monsieur le ministre, dans son rapport publié le 9 juin dernier, le groupe d'État contre la corruption du Conseil de l'Europe, GRECO, a appelé la Hongrie à mettre en œuvre de nouvelles mesures pour lutter contre la corruption à l'égard des personnalités exerçant de hautes fonctions politiques et de la police nationale. Quelle appréciation portez-vous sur ce rapport et quelles mesures entendez-vous prendre pour y répondre? Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Bernard. Mr. Minister, could you please answer these four questions?
Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues, for your questions. First of all, for the question of Minister Korlátszán, yes, you have raised this issue 2 years ago as well, and I think there we were able to discuss that we have been applying two different systems when it comes to the representation of national minorities in our parliaments. As we have been applying two different election systems as well, as you apply a double chamber parliament, and we have a single chamber parliament. And in our case, all 13 recognized minorities are being represented in the parliament through their spokespersons, who can initiate regulations and laws which are being discussed by the parliament. And there is a preferential right attached to the election of the representatives of the national minorities, where 1/4 of the votes are enough to elect a member of a national minority compared to elect anyone from a list of a party running on the elections. Currently, the German minority could overcome this 25% preferential vote threshold. So they are represented with a member of parliament, and the other 12 minorities are being represented by spokespersons. And I can assure you that we Hungarians are proud of those national communities which have been living in Hungary. And as a sign of that, we have increased the budgetary support to these minorities 6 times compared to the budgetary support to them back in 2010 when we have come to office. When it comes to the question of Mr. Kamelchuk, dear colleague, in 1956, my country was ran over by the Soviet Red Army. At that time, the whole Western world looked at what had been happening in Budapest and in Hungary, any kind of support, every kind of support was promised. Radio Free Europe has circulated the biggest ever fake news in our media history, saying that the Americans are around the corner to come to help us. No one came to help. And then my country stayed under communist occupation until 1990. And the whole European continent was very comfortable with that. Since until 1990, we have not received any kind of support, any voice heard that Hungary should be a free and sovereign country with the other Eastern European fellow countries of ours. On the other hand, when it comes to the sanctions, dear colleague, I'm pretty sure you are absolutely aware that Hungary has not vetoed any sanction packages so far in the European Union. But what we have also made it clear that since the Hungarian people are not responsible for this war, we will not let the Hungarian people pay the price for this war. So therefore, when it comes to the security of energy supply, we would never agree with any sanctions which would endanger that, because, as I just said it to the question of our colleague from Azerbaijan, the matter of energy supply is a poor physical issue and has nothing to do with political taste. When it comes to the European Peace Facility, my dear colleague, here I would like to ask you to help us. Your anti-corruption agency has listed the biggest Hungarian bank, the biggest systemic Hungarian bank, on the list of international sponsors of the war, based on 4 lies. And you know what kind of risk it takes when the #1 bank of a country, with the accounts of more than 3 million Hungarians, is being listed on such a list in an absolutely unfair and false manner. The only thing we asked from the Ukrainian authorities in order to enable us to let the proposal through in the European Union regarding EPF was to remove this bank from this list, where it has nothing to do. And this very simple request of your authorities has not been heard. I'd like to ask you to help us and remove the #1 Hungarian bank from this list, where it's totally unfairly listed, and then we will be happy to come back to this question. And when it comes to the 11 prisoners of war, my dear colleague, I think it's good news. I think it's good news they are free. And there were discussions between church and religious organizations where the state of Hungary were absolutely not involved. And based on this agreement, these people were let go free. And those are free people. They are free in their movements in Hungary. They do whatever they want to do. If they would like to get in touch, with the Ukrainian authorities, they are free to do so. I can guarantee this to you. When it comes to the issue of North Macedonia, dear colleague, Hungary is a fan of the enlargement of the European Union. We all know that European Union needs the countries of Western Balkans more than you need the European Union, because this is the only possibility for the European Union to grow. And now we need that very badly. European Union has to be bigger, has to be stronger, and has to include countries with a huge growth potential like your own country. This is one of the reasons why my experts from my ministry, paid by my ministry, are working for your Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help this very complicated procedure of European integration. And you can be sure that Hungary is going to be the #1 supporter of yours in the future as well, when it comes to your European integration, as it has been the case for a very long time now, when it was about your NATO integration, and this is going to be the case now. And we do consider it as a shame that you are not members of the European Union yet. Your country should have been member of the European Union from yesterday and not from tomorrow, alongside with the other countries from the Western Balkans. So you can count on us. And when it comes to our French colleague and for your question regarding corruption. You know, the Hungarian economy has performed growth rate over the European average for the last years continuously. And I'm pretty sure that we can agree that in case there's a systematic corruption in a country, the economy of that country cannot perform such a growth rate. The Hungarian economy, based on our own specificities, we are pretty much dependent on FDI, on foreign direct investments and foreign companies to invest in Hungary. Would you believe that we would have been able to break records of FDI in the last 8 years, year by year, if there was a systematic corruption in Hungary? There might be isolated cases. I do believe that it might happen in every country. Every country is represented in the Council of Europe. These individual cases must be looked after and must be sanctioned according to the national legislations. But when it comes to the question of systematic corruption, I just would like to ask you to talk to your French investors. I'd like to ask you to talk to the German investors who constitute the biggest group of investors in Hungary, or talk to the American investors and ask them whether they had been confronted with such a phenomenon. Otherwise, we are speaking about perceptions again. So we are proud of our achievement in this regard as well, and you can be sure that your investors coming from France, Germany, and other countries can count with the best possible circumstances, and they will not be confronted with such a phenomenon. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. I now have to conclude the questions to you. May I thank you very much for your address to the Assembly, and may I thank you and the members of our Assembly for the questions posed and the answers given. I wish you well. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow afternoon at 2:15 with the agenda which was approved earlier today. I invite you all to be in the hemicycle at your seats in good time tomorrow, because before our presentation by the Chair of the Committee of Ministers, we shall enjoy a short performance by the Volny Choir, who are from Belarus. The sitting is adjourned.